Welcome back, folks, to episode 10 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills and Self-Improvement Project podcast with your host, me, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, also licensed professional counselor and adjunct professor at a local community college, and also martial artist and researcher for a long time. The reason I mentioned that is because it's pertinent to what we're going to be talking about today, and that is physical resilience, and also the idea of development of resilience that often is considered a cognitive process, meaning like we're doing a boxer footwork in our mind to avoid what happens conceptually with the thoughts that come on that are uncomfortable, or situations that we're supposed to deftly avoid with our mental footwork. That is all helpful to a point, assuming your assumption of safety is met, and we're in the safest of places where we can think our way through with the highest level of cognition that we have. But fact of the matter is, resilience is something that we must have before we go into a situation. It's not something you develop in a low-stakes situation. You can develop the tools and strategics a bit, but at some point you have to pressure test it for it to work. So we're going to be talking about some of those things today that go along with what we'll call development of physical resilience. If you want to deal with social situations and not feel threatened, and not feel like you're going to be harmed and respond in a panic anxiety attack, or possibly limit the potential for one getting triggered if one has post-traumatic stress reactivity, even to the level of post-traumatic stress disorder, we have to be able to read and recognize signs and symptoms of stress, anger, and upset, and those things, if we're aware of them, that may upset us or cause us discomfort. This is where our strategies work best, and this isn't taking cognitive behavioral therapeutic methodologies and putting them in a dark light, not at all. But we have to recognize whenever they work best. When they work best is whenever we can preempt what's going on. This doesn't always happen. I usually tend to err on the sides of helping people develop skills by drilling, by practicing and repeating the things that will give them the best benefit in the immediate right now whenever all bets are off and the proverbial poop has hit the fan. So I like teaching stuff that works, even when everything else doesn't. Whenever our thinking patterns start to fall away, a lot of times we have this hyperarousal, hypervigilant state that says heart rate has gone up, breathing has changed to where I'm really sucking wind, and my body's sympathetic nervous system is activated. That tells me I should be either fighting, if it's not already happening, or fleeing if I see it coming. And those are the things that we have to take into consideration when we may hear things like, I'm having an anxiety attack, panic attack, or I'm feeling unsafe, or I start feeling agitated and worried and not knowing why. So, first thing, the development of physical resilience helps you respond more effectively and more flexibly when things go awry, when they go bad, when they don't turn out the way we'd like, or the way that we wish that they were. These are some of those things wherever we start hoping and praying that things will eventually turn around and come around to how I wish I could have controlled them, or somehow had a hand in their outcome that would have been more comfortable or more along the lines of what I expected. And those sound really unrealistic, I know, but I say them this way because these are the admonitions that a person gives. Make sure you have these under control, but these are also the complaints people have on the harder side of it after having lived through something difficult where they wish they could have controlled or had or seen or done something about, or maybe they saw it and didn't have the requisite cognitive capacity, because what happens when stress happens? Blood flow leaves the frontal part of the brain, which means even though I can see it and I know those things and I can picture it, I just can't act on it. I can't decide on it, can't pick it and do it. So the execution aspect starts to go down as far as the complexity of higher thought process or strategic process. So the first tool that we're going to talk about today is self-awareness. A self-awareness, not in the woo-woo sense as far as getting in touch with that internal spirit of self, and I'm not knocking that because I do have spiritual practice that allows me to feel one with my spiritual connection, and that is definitely a cool thing. I don't knock that. But the self-awareness in the sense of what's going on with my body. Whenever I'm under stress, recognizing heart rate goes up, one of the first things that we teach whenever people are doing aerobics, or during the 80s when aerobics got really hot and people are wearing tights and whatnot, they would take their pulse. This isn't something that we lost, but we've underemphasized. That is also a self-awareness tool. Not just whenever you're under stress, but even taking your pulse, for instance, if you're sitting down in the living room watching the show that you like, or maybe you're watching what might be a show that you like to binge that gets you excited or interested, take your pulse. Get familiar with what your pulse rate is like whenever there are certain interests, likes, dislikes, or even those things that are contrived fears, like if you're watching a scary movie, and figure out what it feels like, what your heart rate does. This is an exercise that I teach, and it is a drill. And I will recognize the name of a certain person whom I learned a lot of information from by way of his materials over many years. And he just recently passed, probably about 3 months ago, and that's the late Dr. John Lodderett, martial artist extraordinaire, also a psychologist, sports psychologist. And his adage that I'm lifting and sharing with you was, do the drills and get the skills. This is one of the things that we're doing here with the pulse, and that is a drill, a practice, a repetitive practice where we get skilled at and develop a sense of skillfulness and get information from. And that is, what is my pulse doing when I'm under stress? Now, why is this so important? One of the first things we have to recognize is how I feel whenever I'm going into the beginnings of a stressful state, an anxious state, an angry state, even a depressed or a sad or happy state, getting familiar with what the heartbeat responds like whenever things like this happen, when I'm surprised, when I'm scared. Over time, you develop your catalog, so to speak. Nobody needs to know you're doing it, but it's something that you should know if you want to develop physical resilience, what you respond like under those varied types of stresses. Now, part 2. And this is a principle I'd like to incite, one that I teach, and no one else was teaching it, but I will say that I am coining this term with y'all, and that is matching the movement to the heart rate. So whenever your heart rate goes up, it jumps up. It feels like your heart is trip hammering, skipping a beat, and getting into full tilt boogie. This is whenever we realize that something is going on. And even though maybe my immediate environment may seem safe, my body's responding like it's not, because if the heart rate goes up, we only have one stress response system, and whenever it gets scared, heart rate goes up. When it gets happy, heart rate goes up. So the system that we have to be familiar with is very, very reliant on that heart pumping more blood. And when that cascading wave of blood starts moving through the body, what we don't want to do, once again, do not do this, is holding yourself in a shell, bending your arms, cuddling yourself, and pulling your arms and your knees and your legs and ankles into creased, crimped structure, because you're actually limiting blood flow. The larger arterial structure is taking blood away from the heart to the body, feeding it oxygenated blood so it can do what it has to do, is being limited by you pulling yourself in. And then you wonder why you feel like hell whenever you're stuck that way. And we have to open up the axial creases. Those are the armpits, also the creases in between your legs, your thighs. These are the inguinal creases where the arteries are very large, the femoral arteries, and we can crimp that down a little bit with the amount of tension we have because of our muscles, and squeezing in the popliteal creases behind our knees, and also the creases in our ankles. And all of that, once we start holding ourselves up or into a ball, it's protective, and that's natural. I'm not telling you don't ever do this, because that behavior serves a purpose, and this isn't a don't ever do this, but rather if you're trying to manage your body when it's stressing and your environment is generally safe and you have a point of egress, in other words, a place where you can leave, or at least have the luxury of ability to move and walk, or maybe even go outside or leave the situation, do that. If you're doing that, then you're moving. And if your heart rate is elevated, let's say 110 beats per minute, that's not even a high stress, but this would be like a brisk walk. That can get uncomfortable, just sitting down, holding yourself in a little ball, crimped up into a little shell, like a hermit crab. Hermit crabs are cute, right? Well, why do you think they're crabby? Because they're all cramped up into that little shell, and that's what you do to yourself. Not saying that this is bad. That's not shame or guilt. That's using a metaphor as a teaching tool. And we were talking about that on the last episodes. But the reason I make a point of this is that often we shell up to protect ourselves. And we use that picture to describe what it is I'm trying to do. And that's understandable. Totally cool. Once again, not something you don't want to do in certain situations. It is the appropriate action. But to develop resilience, you have to be allowed to move. You have to tell your body it's okay to move. By speaking the language of the body, which is motion. Motion's the first language we speak when we're in utero and punching and kicking the inside of mama's uterus whenever we're growing and becoming this burgeoning little ball of humanity before we sprout out and become something that smites the world, right? And I laugh when I say that. I love children. I love babies. And the fact is they're incredibly powerful. But the first thing you notice that they don't sit still very long. They move a lot. And we should be able to move whenever we stress. And don't forget that that's the first language we speak. It is a subconscious mind thing. And this is the body, is the subconscious mind ideal that we're speaking of. And if we move, we're alleviating stress because we're telling it in the most expedient way, by demonstration and modeling, by execution and doing, that you can leave the circumstances and consequences of a stressful environment, which means I survive. Therefore, I thrive in this environment and I win. Not points on the board, but rather above ground sucking wind. And that's the win. That is the points on the board, so to speak. I made it. I live because I'm able to move. And I am maintaining my own autonomy as an individual, and I can get away from hurtful things, uncomfortable things, things that are trying to eat with me, and that sort of thing. Not eat with me, but eat me. So the next part about developing resilience is that we have to allow ourselves to have permission to walk away from things. Oftentimes we tend to believe the catch-22. Which is that there's a social contract that says I can't get up and leave. I can't get up and move because it's embarrassing or they'll think badly of me. Let's put things in context. We will use the death, the dangerous, and the potentially damaging and threatening as the bottom line. Were you to bounce off somebody's opinion of you versus being a bologna sandwich and really getting eaten or killed? What's more important, their opinion of you? Or your ability to get away from something that could be very painful? This is a very rhetorical, self-directed question. Don't need to answer. It should be obvious and make sense. And the reason I'm pointing this out is that these double binds, these catch-22 beliefs, often happen so fast that they bring up the feelings in our body. The feelings are not the emotions. Emotions have to do with whenever we get feels and develop opinion about things. That comes later. But the actual perceptual sense of stress, the perceived sense of danger or lack of safety in my environment, that tells me I'm not doing okay. Maybe I should move. And trusting your, in quotes, gut, flexing my air quotes once again, and trusting it to drive you away from those things and let you know when things just don't pan out somewhere, even if you can't put your finger on it and speak it, that's what's wrong in that sense. We have to remember as humans, we develop an enteric brain, that means our stomach brain, way before we ever did our higher cognitive, in quotes, brain that we've been calling brain, much to the chagrin of our stomach brain that's been around even before the head brain ever was. So it's a very powerful thing, and it gives us a lot of information that we have to be willing to trust, and it's okay to trust that. I'm alive because I've trusted my gut brain on more than a few occasions. And there are quite a few of you out there that have equally experienced as much. And that does sound esoteric and woo-woo. It's really not. But its results seem so. And I'm okay with that. I'll leave that there. But I do have a great deal of respect for that. So the two things, practice getting familiar with your personal pulse, heart rate relative to whatever stresses you might experience during the day. And stress isn't always bad. Sometimes it's enjoying yourself. Sometimes it's just visiting with folks, and sometimes you might note that your heart rate jumps up when you speak to certain people because they may speak in a tone and with gesticulations and hand movements that seem really abrupt and twitchy. And those things might fire you off a little bit to where you might get a little tense. And you may tell yourself, well, that's just how they are. And that may be true. But just be aware of it. And then the second part, match the movement to the heart rate. If you are not moving and you're feeling the beginnings or the start of anxiety, panic, and you feel like you're stuck, think about this. That is not a freeze response. If you're twitching and shaking, you're not freezing. Sometimes the tremor happens once everything's over after the fact. Some people do freeze and get stuck, they tense up, and they don't move. There's a difference. You do have a choice in the matter before it becomes too much. The idea to be able to use the movement to the heart rate and alleviate your stress is to catch it early. Right when you get the signal, do it, and it will get you moving in directions that will help you feel not only safe, but alleviated, and also give you an opportunity to feel more socially appropriate and not feel inept or embarrassing in any way. These are some important points. So, to develop resilience, we want heart rate variability. Some things, just some facts on people that struggle with heart conditions and with chronic stress. Often people get honked off, hacked off, upset, and angry at the drop of a hat. Does that mean that they're just out of control? That's a good question. Or does it mean that maybe they've had such chronic stress that their responses have been so narrowed? Mind you, we're efficient, we're human, and our nature is to be efficient and to save energy, and we're expecting danger at any corner. Doesn't it make really good sense to very quickly go from 0 to 60 as far as intensity and upset to alleviate a stress or a potential danger, hurt, or an upset? When we look at it in that vein, then it doesn't seem as bad. It doesn't mean that destructive things don't happen. It doesn't mean that the anger is all of a sudden alleviated and it's really okay. No, what I'm pointing out is that sometimes our responses get so narrow that we only have daily baseline, then boom, explosion, 0 to 60. All of a sudden we're at 60 and we stay there. And that's the only response we seem to have. That would be considered an inflexible response. That would be a lack of heart rate variability. As a health psychologist, recognizing that movement and exercise have a lot to do with our psychology, how we think, because the states of body that result from how our body stresses and de-stresses are the filters through which we experience our world. Day to day, moment to moment, and even our thoughts tend to reflect the states of body that we have. So, being able to develop resilience, I'm encouraging you. If you don't do this, going out for a walk on a regular basis. Walking is a good thing. It doesn't have to be anything where you're going miles at a time. Just the fact that you may put in 10 or 15 minutes at a time and get yourself moving allows the body to respond in a way that feels one at ease. Even if you're listening to a podcast or chit-chatting with a friend or family member as you go, that's okay. The idea is to perambulate, to walk, to move. And this is the suggestion that you're giving your body that not only are you able to move, that's going to be the pertinent suggestion whenever you need it to be, whenever things are most stressful, that says, I can move. I can move away from things. I can move towards things. And that also encourages you to feel a sense of control in your life and your environment. Walking is a good thing. Resistance training is another. If you do anything like kettlebell or club bell, conventional weights bore me to tears. I do not like doing bodybuilding isolation exercises, but I like the kettlebells and club bells because they move in curving arcs and eddies, and it feels like I'm doing something that seems natural but also functionally moving. Doing functional movement exercises are good. Doing body weight exercises, you can tolerate those things. If you are wheelchair bound, being able to, it's not your wheelchair that gets anxiety, it's you in the wheelchair. But if you can feel like you can get away from something, very important. Be able to move, get used to moving yourself about and using that mobility frequently and knowing that that is part of your safety and security response. Now, I'm going to say something that's very unpopular right now, but I want us to pay attention. Whenever we're in physical pain or we have a physical injury or a limitation, Whenever somebody has experienced, let's say, severe back pain and there's limitation due to that, and it's chronic, people get grouchy, they get angry, and it's not grouchy in the sense of being irritating to people, but people are enduring pain. They're resisting that. Also, whenever we feel like we can't get away from our circumstances and consequences because I am hobbled, I am injured, or I'm unable to, we note that people get physically depressed, but there are also those that feel like they get angry more quickly. That makes sense. But also on top of that, if you were ever to corner somebody or make somebody feel cornered, or they in their own mind feel like they're cornered and can't get away, even if it's just an argument, they're going to be more apt to be ugly and rude and go for the throat, so to speak. And we have to be very aware of that. And it doesn't just happen to others, but it can happen to us too. So recognizing that I have limitations means that I have to be more aware of timing and being able to stay away and get away from things that could cause me to feel upset. So that way maybe I don't say or do things I will regret later. But also knowing that if I am put in those situations, I may be more apt to be more extreme in my reaction to things, even if it's not warranted. And part of it is that expulsion of expression and expulsion of that sense of pain, mental, emotional, physical, and what have you. Now that was a lot in a little bit. And I just want to tell you thank you for your time. Certainly good speaking to you this evening. This was a particularly important topic. Once again, giving some skills and some encouragements on how to develop resilience. We want heart rate variability. And heart rate invariability has a lot to do with why we stress sometimes. And if we can encourage the body to go to baseline after it's stressed and back to baseline, that means our heart rate can change. That means we become flexible in response. We become better survivors as a result. And also, that gives us a little more room to have compassion for other people, patience with ourselves, and the ability to recognize that not only am I deserving of love, care, affection, kindness, understanding, respect, and patience, but other people are as well. And it's easy for me to demonstrate those things whenever I'm trying to connect and talk and just be a good person at large. So for now, I want to tell you thanks again. I certainly enjoyed visiting with you about this topic today. But please share, follow, subscribe. If you have any commentary, send me some commentary or feedback to the email runningmangetskills@gmail.com. And on the next podcast, I'm going to discuss why Running Man is Running Man and why the name to the human stress model. Take care. Have a good evening.